Of all the changes in ordinary life during the last 100 years, technology has probably had the most impact. In the ninth part of The Century Speaks, Essex people talk about the effect on their working and home lives. We hear about the Ford car assembly line, the shop floor at Marconi, and the printing and publishing industries. There are descriptions of the office, from the strict regime of the 50s typing pool to the first huge computers. Finally, people speak about the introduction of home computing, video recorders and automated telephone answering.
And this is the buy-off of the 1.8 diesel now, which was the 1.6 when you were there, Vic.
Yeah,
Yeah?
that's right,
Yeah, we've since uprated it.
yeah.
Turned it into a 1.8 and put it in the Mondeo. Yeah, it was a Fiesta when we were here before. Yeah, the tractor line was along here,
Yeah,
wasn't
that's
it?
right,
Yeah.
yeah. They used to come off this end, didn't they?
Yeah, because this was the end of the building before, and there was a gap. That flow roof wasn't there. If you go down in the basement here, you can see the windows that go up to the road outside. Obviously the road isn't there now. Yeah?
In the old days, they used to do the lorries down there in the basement, didn't they?
Yeah, vans. Yeah, that was the 15-seater, wasn't it? Yeah, Thames.
During the war, they used to cut the gears for the Rolls-Royce Merlin, didn't they?
Yeah. We used to assemble, did assemble them in those. Did you remember that? You was before me, Vic. Yeah, Vic was here when they made the Sterling machine, a Rolls-Royce engine that went in the Spitfire.
Yeah.
Yeah, we made it here.
When I first started, I started on the cylinder block line that were making V8 engines. We did used to alternate between different machines, but the first few months I worked on the first machine in the line, which was what they call a rotary miller. And this thing was something like 20 foot high, 20 foot wide and about 15 foot deep. And it was basically a great big drum that revolved very, very slowly. It would take about 10 minutes to make one revolution. This was quite a physical job, because although you had this air-assisted lift, you still had to maneuver this into special seatings in this thing, and the spanner you used was about 2 foot long, and you had to really tug on the bolts. It would take about 2 minutes. I think these used to produce about 30 jobs an hour.
We're at the engine plant, which used to be the whole of the Ford factory here. They used to do the machining and assembling and everything in this plant here. Now it's ended up just making the engines for the cars. We had a ride round and had a look at different parts of the factory, and I could sort of compared it with my days, and I found that things have moved on considerably. The first thing one notices is there's no overhead cranes, there's no tractors pulling skids round, and also another thing that is quite noticeable is that the floor is no longer made up of tarry blocks, which it used to be in the old days to enable the tractors to pull their skids along. When one first came in, the first thing that one noticed was a terrible noise. It was really deafening. You really couldn't hear someone speak to you. It's a lot less noisy now. In those days, there used to be, the steam trains used to come in, end of the line was a rolling mill. They used to collect the steel from the rolling mill and take it out, and also on these trains there used to be closed carriages to take out the swarf that was accumulated. They had overhead cranes in each bay, but with the coming of forklift trucks, they done away with the overhead cranes. The forest of drills, there used to be a whole bay full of drills with about 18 inches to 2 foot between them. It was really frightening. It was just like being in the jungle with all these drills There was balconies in most of the bays. The tool room was on a balcony. The general stores was on a balcony. It's so different. I know from the wartime till I retired, it changed tremendously, but I didn't think it had changed again so dramatically since I retired. On this visit, even more of the manpower has disappeared. I actually thought that they was on strike when I came in today. I've seen more people here when the factory's closed than what there are now.
When we were on this machine, everyone was encouraged to keep the line going. So if you needed to go for pee, you would either get the relief operator. If he wasn't available, you would arrange with the fellow on the other side of the machine to take over your side as well. And when you did that, this really was a lot of work, because although you could comfortably do this in a couple of minutes, if you had to do two sides in a couple of minutes, it was much more active and much more physical. And I remember once I'd put the chains in, undid the block to pull it out, and because of the rush to do this, I hadn't got the chain right into the hole. And so consequently, when I pulled it out, the hook slipped out of the hole and the chain whipped round and took a hunk of my face away. So I then stopped the machine, and the block is now swinging on one chain, and I shouted to the foreman, I cut myself, I'm going down to medical. But when they'd sewn up, I then came back and carried on working almost as nothing happened. I'd often thought since that if this has happened nowadays, the company would probably be fined quite a hefty lump for having a bit of equipment that doesn't meet the health and safety at work standards. That happened in 1947. By 1950, they just got what they call an automated line. And immediately, we lost half hour. Remember this? I think it was about 56 operators required on the first line I was on, and 26 operators on this automated line. And so there was basically no physical effort at all. The second line I was telling you about, the console line, used to produce 60 cylinder blocks an hour instead of 30. So it halved the labour force and double the number produced. But nowadays, I've been round Fords as a visitor, and now everything is not only automated, they almost don't have to even push it in, but they press a button. They don't even have to know if the dimensions are correct on the block, because that's all done automatically and computerized.
When I was young, it wasn't the biggest place in Chelmsford. The biggest place in Chelmsford to work was Hoffman's, followed by Crompton Parkinson's. Then it was Marconi. Once you went there, you basically got a job for life. I'd got to go to work in an industry of some sort because the war was on. My brother worked there and he done all right, so my dad said you can go to Marconi's. Whether I wanted to or not, I can't remember. But at 14, kids didn't know really what they want to do at all, any more than they do now. I mean, you don't just more or less reach puberty and you were going to work and doing some job that was as boring as boring. I mean, they found all the rotten, boring jobs for kids to do. Removing burrs was a good one. If you don't know what burrs are, they're all the sharp bits on pieces of metal and things like this. And you just sat there with a file, doing hundreds and thousands of bits for days and days on end. I started off as what they called a runner. I worked in the stores, and people used to go to the stores and say, I want this, and they'd find it for you, and then they'd give it to the boy, which was me and a couple of three others, to take to the whoever it was. That was all over the factory. And it was after that that I went out onto the shop floor, where they made all little tiny bits and pieces to go into compared to now very large pieces of equipment. A transmitter would be the size of a room, huge. Now it's a little tiny thing, because things that now move electronically moved mechanically then. So there was a lot of bits and pieces of metal that had got to be made, bent, turned, milled, or whatever. And so we had quite a large machine shop and a large area for making bits and pieces. Now we had several shops that just wired or assembled and wired. You assembled all this lot on a large chassis, which now comes out to the size of a postage stamp. So that has all changed. I mean, with all the modern electronics that they've got, things are now made on machines that were made by hundreds of people. No longer do we need valves. Once they got transistors and things like this come in, that was it. When I left, they'd got machines which made printed boards automatically. They didn't need all these people which were sitting there screwing things together and wiring things up. Everybody, I think, in those days was proud to say they worked for Marconi, and you'll find a lot of them still do. You talk to the old boys, I see them down the town, and they still talk about Marconi and what's happening there, and they still look upon Marconi's with pride. No matter where you walk, you see somebody that worked at Marconi's. Well, at least I do, because I worked there all my life.
I don't think there's any printing firm nowadays that gives apprenticeship schemes. I mean, I served 7 years apprenticeship with 5 years at the London School of Printing, and you had to in those days because of the, lack of technology, shall we say. In 1949, I started at Her Majesty's Station Office in Drury Lane as an apprentice machine minder, and the machines there were massive with cast iron frames. The print was done letterpress compared with lithography today. It was a very labour intensive operation involving compositors, machine minders and warehouse staff. The machines had to be very big because they took so long to set up. I mean, the biggest machine I worked was a Mealy 2 revolution machine, which we used to print, I think, was 32 pages at a time on a book. And if you had 32 pages to make ready for any length of run, it took you 2 days before you could even start running. Whereas today, you have a smaller machine and you're literally running within minutes. I mean, at the stationery office, we had a whole floor of compositors, linotype operators, monotype operators, all standing at type cases, putting letters together in a little frame to print from. We had 2 overseers in the machine room, plus a reader, so that when you took your first pull off a machine, that sheet went to the reader, and he made sure that no one had put a hammer across the lead type. If you had, that went up to the composing room. They had to send a compositor down to change all the letters, any damaged letters within actually on the machine. Type was made up of 3 metals, lead, antimony and tin. Tin gave it a slight hardness, but you only had to literally smile at a lead typeface and it dented. If the lead type hadn't been sort of locked up tight enough, you would directly you lifted it up and turned it horizontally, the whole lot would fall out and you were knee deep in lead. If you had a big publication to get out, there was dozens of compositors making up different pages. At the side of the composing room, they had literally a bank of readers that would initially read the proofs. Any errors that the compositor had made would then be changed, and then the chases would be locked up and then sent down to the machine room for printing. Whereas nowadays it's all done on a computer screen, sort of 10 times as fast.
Fast changes. I was one of the founder staff members of Shoot magazine. Everything used to take almost a week to prepare, and it would all be done on paper and pencils and rubbers and pictures that had to be sized up on light boxes and projected onto screens. The difference in technology is, well, it's difference between driving the car and going up to the moon in a spaceship. It's light years away from how it used to be. When I became managing editor of the football group at IPC, I remember telling my staff that they got to put away all the layout sheets, all the pencils. We were going over to new technology and getting in Apple Macs computers, and they were outraged. They did not want to lose their typewriters. My designers didn't want to lose the layout sheets because they could not envisage laying out a magazine on a desktop. But within about 3 weeks, they were steeped in it. And I said to the art editor, "I'm going to take your computer away." He said, "Well, no." I said, He said, I'm used to it now. And you couldn't get it away from them. Now everything's in colour. We used to publish pictures that were always a fortnight out of date because we had to get our pictures back air freight. Technology advanced so much that we were getting pictures back along the wire virtually about half an hour after the match had finished. Now it's a lot more immediate than that.
I left school on Friday, I think it was, started work on the Monday. That was a horrific experience. I mean, there was no preparation for going out to work at that time. You left school, you went to work. I went in as a junior typist, but I never settled there. Never settled at all. I mean, I'd done all my city and guilds and what have you, got all these typing things. When I got in the office, I couldn't type. I was absolutely scared stiff. Over a period of time, things that you did manually, ledger work that you did manually, everything had to be entered in the ledger. You got your invoice, you wrote it in the book, in a certain column if it was out and another column if it was in. And suddenly when you change from that job to that job, things are done differently. There's a machine to do it. So then you have to learn the machine. And when you learn that machine, you just about get that under your belt and you change your job again and there's a different machine until you get to today and you've got a computer for everything. In some respects, yes, it's progress. But in a lot of other respects, I think a lot of today's people have lost a lot by not having to handwrite properly. They've lost the skill of writing nicely. It's all the scribble. Because they never had to do these things along the way and gradually generate to what we have today. A lot of people don't know how to put together a letter. I feel sorry for some people because they can't do these things, but it's only because they haven't had my experience of when I first started work and had to do these things by hand. You had typewriters of various types and for certain types of jobs. We had typewriters with huge, great big long carriages for doing the gas bills that came in on British Rail. And they take rolls of paper, not just a sheet of paper, rolls of paper. And they must have been 3-4 foot long. And you had this roll thing that stayed behind the typewriter and stayed in place as you wove it up, you know. And then you had these very, very old typewriters, which it was almost a ding, ding, ding thing, not nice smooth things you've got today. You had to press hard. The bank was very steep, the bank of keys. I mean, today they're almost flat, but in those days they were almost like going up a 1 in 10 hill, you know. I think a lot of people must have got wrist problems from them because of the angle they had, their hands had to set to use all the keys. We had a huge office in the railway and everybody was on a typewriter of some sort. You couldn't talk. You'd never heard a telephone ring because the clatter of all these different typewriters. When I think back on it, you know, we all sat in long rows, dead straight. You weren't allowed to turn your head and But you couldn't anyway because of the noise. Your supervisor or your manager sat behind you at the back of the office so that you could see everything that was going on. And even if you were at a filing cabinet, what they thought was too long, you were chivied up, get back to your desk and get working. If you needed to go to the loo, you didn't quite have to put your hand up, but it wasn't far short of it. And if you had to go into another office, there was usually somebody who came along behind you to make sure you were doing what you were supposed to be doing and not just chatting to anybody, you know. Yeah, the regime was pretty tight.
They used to produce tabulations of accounts and the payroll and all this sort of thing on a thing they called a power Samus machine. Now, they had dozens of girls and women sitting in this office pool who would get the original document and punch the details from it into a card. And they'd punch it into various holes on this card at breakneck speed. How they ever did it, I don't know. Then they would collect all these cards up and push them through or feed them into a power Samus machine. It would make a devil of a racket and these cards would chug their way through. And every one of these holes meant something because at the other end came this printed tabulation with all the details on it. Invoice number, if you were doing invoices, invoice number, date, the customer or the client, whatever it was, the amount, the total, the account number you had to put it to, and so on, so on. All punched from the original document. And every week there were half a dozen of them crying because the governor was always getting at them. I can't think of his name now. But he used to bounce up and down in fury because something happened and the cards were wrong and they'd all burst into tears. But later on, they were one of the earliest, I suppose, to have computers. Now, in those days, they were enormous. But you couldn't use them in those days. They had all these so-called experts, and they had, I should imagine, half a floor of Whalley. And that is a big place. It's in the 60s sometime. And you've seen them on these old science fiction films. And there were huge boxes with reels in them. You know, massive, great round things that spun around. And there were rows of them. And all these people walking around looking earnest. But eventually they got smaller and smaller and smaller. And the last time I was there about 4 or 5 years ago, just on a visit. They got VDUs, all the girls are using them. And they've got laptops, little personal computers on the desk. It's totally changed, totally. It's just like you have over the telephone, you know, they say, what's your postcode? And they know all about you straight away. Well, that's how it is at Ford's now. You just press a button and it all comes up on the computer. It must be so utterly boring, apart from it's bad for your eyes anyway. All that radiation, eye ache, back ache, and they call it an easy life. No, it doesn't do for me. I'd rather get about, do things.
My dad's faced with IT at work now and he really does struggle. I don't know how much longer he can sort of take the pressure because he just can't catch on to them at all. It's so time consuming to teach him even the most basic thing. It's as if he hasn't got that part of his brain. It's never been worked until the last 5 years. For so long he hasn't met one and all of a sudden he's in at the deep end when his office, you know, really converted to computers. I mean, I did my work experience at another branch of his company and there was a couple of younger people, but they were mainly sort of over between 30 and 60, I'd say. None of them knew as much as I did. I was so shocked, you know, as being sort of a girl who isn't that interested in it. I taught them so many basic things. You know, they had a whole office full of computers, but nobody really knew how to use them. It was just amazing at how backwards. I mean, it was the VAT office, so, you know, it's sort of the civil service, and they still had no clue whatsoever. We have got a PC at home, but neither of them use it that much. My dad will do something if he has to, whereas I and my younger sister will spend quite a lot of time on it, really, whether working or she plays games, and you can only see it getting worse, which is why I worry about my dad. I mean, I'm not a great lover of IT, but I can get on, and as I will have to use it in the workplace probably.
I think the biggest jump in technology came with the introduction of video. If we take my previous job, where I was working with educational audio-visual aids, the mainstay of audio-visual equipment was the 16mm projector, and this was the only way to convey a message to a large number of children. Late 1973, we had the opportunity to buy a video, and this thing was sort of delivered to the school, and we had these really thick 1 hour maximum videotapes to run on this thing, and it scared the life out of me. I'd been trained on 16mm projectors, and I thought I was quite skilled at it. I mean, I could lace up a 16mm projector with my eyes shut. When I saw this video machine, it was very, very heavy. It took these things called videotapes that you could not see an image on. It had no sprocket holes or anything. I just didn't understand the technology. It was so different. We had sort of open reel tape recorders and obviously since the mid-60s a cassette recorder. But the material didn't even look like audio tape. It was a different colour, it was much wider, and it just looked so cumbersome. And there was this massive manual that came with it, with instructions of how to clean this machine. You had to dismantle the top of the machine, and they had this cleaning kit that you had to use to clean the heads and things. And I was expected to clean this thing, and I was really frightened that I would do some damage. It was very expensive at the time. I think it was around about £800. Now, £800 for a school was a lot of money. And this thing was sort of locked away in a secure cabinet and kept on the top floor of the school. And I was the only one that was allowed to operate it. And of course, children used to take the mick out of you when you made your entrance and press the buttons and that. As the years progressed, various companies brought out different formats. And at one stage, it just looked like a complete and utter mess. I mean, you had Betamax, you had U-Matic, you had the Philips system. I mean, there's so many different formats. It was so expensive. And then all of a sudden the VHS system came out, and that seemed to be accepted as the system. And then from then on, I think it just took off, and the poor old projector was destined for the scrap heap.
My son-in-law eventually showed me how to work it, but I was very, very nervous of it. I was forever doing the wrong thing. Eventually that video did go wrong, and I went with my daughter to Basildon, and she went into the shop and said, "I want the simplest video you've got for my mother." See, which I thought was very significant, and the simplest one I've got, and I can cope with it quite well. And I've even learnt to erase programs and to do all sorts of clever things. But I do find that a lot of, particularly women of my age, can't do it. Probably because our minds don't take it in so easily. We haven't been brought up with computers and things of that nature, and we are frightened of them. I mean, I wouldn't program in anything. If somebody was here, I have to do it on my own, and I can do it wrong. But I have sort of learnt to cope with it, but I don't like it. I don't like anything mechanical. When I was teaching, we used to have a record player which was played for the children while they came into assembly. And if it went wrong, they used to say, "Has Mrs. Johnson touched that?" And I don't like the voices on the telephone. You happen to be dialing a number and you pause a minute to look at the number, and the voice says, "The number you have dialed is not recognised." And I have been known to shout out quite a lot of obscenities at them. You get confused, that's the problem. Because you want to say, "Could you say that again?" And of course they can't, because you're talking to a machine. I don't like when you ring up and they say, "If so-and-so, press this button, and if so-and-so else, press that button." And I don't want to know that. I'd rather somebody actually spoke to me.
In part 9 of The Century Speaks, Technology, you heard the voices of Victor Lapine, Ken Eastlake, Sid Bass, John Newman, Peter Stewart, Maggie Mitchell, George Curry, Laura Eaton, Jim Waters and Isabel Johnson.